Recognized Senator Jackie Dingfelder.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I bring you House Bill 2186, which provides important tools for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. It's not up there yet, but that's what we're talking about. You're probably aware that transportation causes about a third of our greenhouse gas emissions, and the measures in this bill will result in at least a 10% reduction in these emissions from transportation. Here's a brief summary of what this bill will do. House Bill 2186 will establish a low-carbon fuel standard to reduce the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions from gasoline and diesel. It also establishes a process to ensure that replacement parts for vehicle emission control systems perform as well as the original equipment. There's a requirement for auto mechanics to check and fill tires when otherwise servicing vehicles to improve fuel efficiency, authority to restrict unnecessary idling of commercial ships to reduce wasted fuel, and finally, a metropolitan planning organization greenhouse gas emissions task force was added in the Rules Committee to look at other ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through alternative land use and transportation scenarios. Colleagues, these measures make sense not only because they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also because they save fuel, they save money, and they spur economic development and reduce air pollution. House Bill 2186 also includes two studies, the results of which we'll consider in 2011. There's an evaluation of measures to improve truck fuel efficiency and an evaluation of land use and transportation scenarios, as I mentioned, to accommodate growth while reducing greenhouse gas emission in Oregon's 6 metropolitan planning organizations. Colleagues, to address concerns that this bill is too broad or delegates too much authority to the Environmental Quality Commission, the bill was amended greatly, both in my committee and in the Rules Committee. We eliminated provisions to reduce the greenhouse gas content of consumer and commercial products and eliminated the tire efficiency standards. We converted provisions to improve truck efficiency and reduce truck idling into a study, and so that we can reconsider these measures in the next session. We added a sunset to the low-carbon fuel standard. If this provision is not authorized by a new bill, it will sunset in 2015. We also added provisions to defer requirements if needed to ensure that the price of gasoline and diesel in Oregon remains competitive with the price in neighboring states. Finally, we explicitly exempted agriculture. Absolutely nothing in this bill affects the agricultural industry. Since the low-carbon fuel standard is the most important measure in this bill, here's a little more detail. House Bill 2186 will set us on a gradual path to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions associated with transportation fuel, a reduction, colleague, of 10% by 2010 to 2020, or an average of about 1% per year. The bill does not mandate the use of ethanol or other specific fuel. Instead, it harnesses the power of the market by setting a performance standard for transportation fuels and allowing the fuel distributors to select the best low-carbon fuels to meet this standard. A low-carbon fuel standard is about energy independence, price stability at the pump, and creating a market for Oregon fuels. Colleagues, Oregonians spent about $2 billion per each year on fuel. That's $2 billion. Virtually all of that money leaves the state. Every dollar that we spend on oil is a dollar that we're not spending to support Oregon jobs and invest in Oregon's economy. With a low-carbon fuel standard, some of the fossil fuel we're currently using will be replaced with cleaner fuels, cellulosic ethanol, biodiesel, electricity, hydrogen, and others. These fuels are not just cleaner because they produce less greenhouse gases at the point of combustion, but they're also cleaner over their entire life cycle. Cleaner to produce because it doesn't require much energy to extract, grow, or refine. Cleaner to transport because it's produced locally, not in Saudi Arabia. Cleaner in the big picture because it doesn't reduce emissions from the fuel at the expense of increasing emissions from other parts of the economy, such as food production. Just as important, this low-carbon fuel standard will spur development of advanced biofuels and electric vehicle infrastructure in the state, and they'll be made locally from farm and forest waste, which will score much higher than corn-based biofuels produced and imported from the Midwest. This will send the right signal to developers to build low-carbon fuel infrastructure right here in Oregon. And also, by diversifying the fuel supply, This standard provides insulation from price spikes as we know are coming in the petroleum fuels. Colleagues, it wasn't that long ago that the price of gasoline was $4 a gallon at the pump, and unfortunately it looks like we're heading back that way. While the low-carbon fuel standard cannot stop these price increases, it can dampen them by saving Oregonians money. So if these low-carbon fuels are so great, you may be wondering, why do we need a law to increase their use? The answer is that our fuel distribution network is controlled by companies that are in the business of selling petroleum-based fuels. I don't think that's a mystery to any of us. There's no incentive for these companies to blend low-carbon fuels. So this bill fixes the problem by making it in the best interest of gasoline and diesel distributors to blend low-carbon fuels. And it does this without mandating that any specific fuel is used. So what if we're wrong about the costs? What if the advanced biofuels plants aren't built? Will we see fuel prices go through the ceiling? The answer is no. This bill requires the Department of Environmental Quality to delay or defer the low-carbon fuel standard as needed to prevent shortages of fuel that could result in price increases. In addition, the bill requires DEQ to track our fuel prices on a monthly basis to ensure that they remain competitive with states in our region and defer requirements if the prices go up. Okay, you're probably thinking, so still, why should we adopt this? And why should Oregon go first? Well, colleagues, we're not first. California's already adopted a low-carbon fuel standard and is moving ahead with implementation. Governor Gregoire in Washington has already issued an executive order requiring Washington agencies to develop the details of a low-carbon fuel standard. And if we adopt House Bill 2186, Oregon and Washington will be on the same schedule for developing the standard, and I'm hopeful that we will have consistent requirements up and down the West Coast. In addition, the New England states are moving ahead, and we know from experience that the federal government won't act unless enough states do. So I hope this bill spurs the feds to adopt a low-carbon fuel standard to bring the rest of the country along. So in closing, the low-carbon fuel standard, along with other provisions of this bill, will take important next steps in the direction of energy independence, green jobs, and prosperity in a carbon-constrained future. The bill has been narrowed to a short list of targeted measures to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. These measures have big side benefits, saving consumers money and spurring economic development. There's also, as I mentioned, extensive safeguards have been added to ensure that we, the Legislative Assembly, maintain control. For all these reasons, colleague, I urge your vote.